Hey guys, tonight we slip back into a world where people didn't sleep the way we do now. Imagine you're nestled in a creaky wooden bed, the straw poking through your linen sheets, a single candle guttering beside you. It's not quite midnight, and you've already had your first full sleep. Now you're wide awake again. Why? Because for centuries, folks across medieval Europe believed that sleep came in two parts, the first sleep and the second sleep. This wasn't just a strange regional habit. It was the norm. You'd tuck yourself in shortly after sunset, drift off for 4 or 5 hours, and then, around midnight, wake up. But you weren't groggy or frustrated. No, this waking time was expected. You might pray, sit by the hearth, talk quietly with your family, or even, let's be honest, sneak off for a little medieval intimacy. Then, after an hour or two, you'd settle down again for your second round of slumber. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe. Invite viewers to post their location and local time. Now, dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You reach for a woolen blanket that smells faintly of smoke and damp wool, and your feet instinctively curl away from the icy stone floor. There's no central heating, of course. Your heat comes from what little the fire gave off earlier, or maybe from a warm brick you wrapped in cloth and tucked at your feet. Outside, a dog howls. You hear it through the shuttered window, along with the faint rustle of wind curling through the thatched roof. The idea of segmented sleep, also called biphasic sleep, was first documented by historian Roger Kirch, though references to it appear in medical texts, diaries, even court records. One 16th century doctor casually mentioned that after the first sleep, it was healthy to meditate, read, or engage in conjugal duty. How generous. Interestingly, this pattern wasn't limited to peasants. Nobles, monks, and even kings followed it. In monasteries, the middle night wakefulness aligned with canonical hours, set prayer times like matins and lauds. So while you, a humble thatcher in your hay-stuffed mattress, are quietly watching the embers in your hearth fade to red, a monk in a chilly stone abbey might be trudging toward chapel with a lantern in hand. Now here's a quirky twist. Some people believed that dreams occurring between first and second sleep were more true, more prophetic, like they were transmitted in that in-between moment when the body is soft and the soul still wandering. This led to an entire cottage industry of dream interpretation. Yes, even back then, people wanted to know what it meant when you dreamt of losing your teeth, or riding a goat backward into a storm. Scholars remain divided on why biphasic sleep faded from common use. Some point to the Industrial Revolution, with artificial lighting and factory schedules disrupting the natural rhythm. Others suggest it was a gradual cultural shift, with more centralized city life encouraging more consolidated nights. But one thing's clear, if you slept 8 hours straight in 1420, people might have thought you were sick, or just incredibly lazy. As the candle finally burns down to a stub, you yawn, not from boredom but because your body knows it's time to nestle back under the covers. The second sleep is coming. You close your eyes, not quite ready, but obedient to a rhythm older than clocks, older than kings, older than anything you've ever been taught about what a normal night should look like. And as your breathing slows and your fingers grow still beneath the wool, remember, you're not just dozing in the dark. You're participating in an ancient forgotten rhythm of rest, one that once shaped nights across an entire continent. Before we traded firelight and silence for screens and alarms, you stir beneath scratchy wool and coarse linen, not from discomfort, but because this waking hour between sleeps is oddly peaceful. There's a soft crackle from the hearth, long since reduced to glowing coals, and the muffled rhythm of rain tapping against the wooden shutters. This is no accident. You're supposed to be awake now. In this in-between time, medieval people didn't toss and turn, wondering why they couldn't sleep. No, this was their time. They used it well. You rise slowly, wrapping a cloak around your shoulders, and step across the uneven floor. Maybe you're headed to relieve yourself in the corner chamber pot. You'll have to empty that later. Or maybe you're off to sit quietly with a sibling or spouse, whispering by candlelight. This wasn't just a moment of restlessness. It was a sacred, intentional pause in the night, and for many it was deeply spiritual. You might pull out a prayer book, hand-copied by monks, and whisper psalms. You'd hear others doing the same, murmurs filtering through thin wooden walls. It was a time for reflection, for asking forgiveness, or sometimes for bold midnight mischief. Some even believed this was the best time to conceive children, as the body was refreshed from the first sleep and more fertile. Science may laugh, but your great-great-grandmother probably didn't. Even outside the household, this midnight liminal space held meaning. There were rumours of bakers rising early to stoke ovens, monks trudging through echoing corridors for matins, or even thieves creeping through darkened streets while others prayed for their souls. Depending on your beliefs or your superstitions, this was either the holiest part of the night or the most haunted. And now you're just sitting quietly, eyes half-lidded, the candles glow casting long shadows on the beams overhead. You reach for a cup of something warm, maybe mulled cider if you're lucky, or a bitter herbal brew your grandmother swears will ward off nightmares. Outside, a rooster crows prematurely, confused by torchlight in a neighbour's cottage. You chuckle softly. Poor bird. Fooled again. Quirky detail? Oh, you'll love this. Some medieval people believed that during this waking hour one's soul temporarily wandered outside the body. It wasn't gone. It just stepped out for some air, which explains why you're not supposed to be startled awake. That sudden jolt, that could slam the soul back too hard. Best to wake slowly, like now. And here's the twist. This whole two-part sleep habit might be making a comeback. Some sleep researchers believe our natural rhythm leans toward biphasic sleep even today. And modern experiments have shown that if you remove artificial light and noise, people tend to revert to this exact pattern. 2 sleeps, with a dreamy, glowing pause in between, like right now. Experts still debate whether this waking period was consistent across seasons. Did people really wake up like this in the depths of freezing January? Or were these habits more flexible, bending with daylight hours and harvest needs? The jury's still out, but here in your cosy cottage none of that matters. You stretch your arms toward the rafters and let out a long sigh, settling into the peace of this quiet, holy, oddly social hour. Somewhere nearby, someone else is probably doing the same thing. Maybe kneeling, maybe laughing, maybe sneaking bread from the pantry. This was your midnight hour. And if you're still with me now, listening to the echoes of old prayers and nighttime chatter, tap 1 in the comments below if this tale charms your heart, or 2 if it sends shivers down your spine. You slip back toward your bedding, ready now. The candle flickers one last time before snuffing out. You nestle under the wool once more, the first part of the night behind you, and the second waiting like a soft curtain. You ease back beneath your blanket, but this time you prop yourself slightly upright, arranging the hay-stuffed pillow behind your back. That's how people like you slept, after all, semi-upright, not flat on their backs like modern sleepers. It sounds odd now, but to a medieval mind, lying fully horizontal was just a little too dead-looking. And in truth, there were reasons for this choice beyond superstition. Many folk slept sitting up, especially the elderly and sick, because it eased breathing. In smoky, draughty cottages where air was thick with soot and the occasional whiff of dung from nearby animals, reclining completely could feel suffocating. Plus, propped-up sleep helped with digestion. At least that's what every herbalist claimed. And who are you to argue with someone selling dried beetle powder? Another reason for upright sleep? The design of medieval beds themselves. You glance over at yours now, a high wooden frame with side panels, almost like a cabinet or small wardrobe. It's not a luxurious four-poster, but a box bed, and you're lucky to have one. These beds came with little doors that could be shut to trap in warmth. Some even had a shelf for candles or holy icons. If you're picturing something cozy, you're halfway there. If you're picturing a human-sized chicken coop, well, also fair. Inside that cramped space, lying flat was rarely an option. You learn to doze upright, legs bent slightly, shoulders hunched, chin tucked. Families often shared these beds too, especially peasants. So you had to be strategic with elbows and knees. A good night's sleep involved equal parts patience and negotiation. And it wasn't just commoners. Even noble beds were often designed for semi-reclined positions. Court physicians advised their lords and ladies to avoid fully prone sleep, warning of night vapours and humours rising from the stomach. Did anyone actually see these humours? Of course not. But medieval medicine had a flair for poetic dread. There's a fringe theory you might find amusing. Some scholars believe upright sleeping habits originated from deep Christian fears about death and the resurrection. If you looked too much like a corpse while sleeping, maybe you'd attract the wrong kind of attention from the spiritual realm. So best to sleep as if you might jump up at any moment, just in case an angel or something else paid a visit. Quirky enough? Let's add this. Box beds were also used to protect people from wandering spirits, drafty winds, rats, and, on rare but memorable occasions, thieves. Yes, there are recorded stories of people locking themselves inside their beds at night like makeshift fortresses. Talk about sleeping with one eye open. Scholars remain divided on how widespread box beds really were, and whether sleeping upright was universally practiced or more of a trend among specific regions. In places like Brittany, Scotland and Flanders, the box bed became a generational fixture. In warmer southern regions, people sprawled more freely, sometimes on rooftops during summer. Go figure. You shift slightly now, adjusting your posture in the imagined confines of your wooden cocoon. You imagine the smell: old wood, smoke, damp straw, a hint of rosemary tucked under the mattress to ward off pests. Your breath fogs faintly in the cold air, and your fingers fumble for warmth under your tunic. And in that position, curled, alert, half upright, you understand something deeply medieval. Sleep wasn't about surrender. It was a posture of awareness, even in rest. You didn't just collapse into unconsciousness. You eased into a position that let you wake fast, pray quickly, defend yourself, or simply shift to let your neighbour stretch their legs. No one promised you comfort in the night, but they did promise purpose. And now, as your body gives in, bit by bit, to the second sleep, you feel oddly safe, ensconced in your wooden alcove like a shell or a cradle. Sleep, but don't lie too flat. You've got angels to impress. You've barely drifted off again when the chill wakes you, an icy nudge from the world outside your little box bed. The fire's gone out. Your nose is cold, and the wool blanket has twisted around your legs like it's trying to flee. You reach down with stiff fingers to pull it back up, only to discover the real medieval sleep villain, the cold bed. The stone walls around you don't just sit there. They radiate the night's chill like ancient refrigerators. Thatched roofs, drafty shutters, and floors that might as well be ice rinks all contribute to your nightly suffering. You can practically hear your own breath as you exhale into the black. But don't worry, our medieval ancestors had tricks. You reach toward the foot of your bed and find the warm brick you wrapped earlier in cloth, now faintly tepid. If you were richer, it might have been a brass pan filled with embers, dragged back and forth under the covers by a sleepy servant. Or if you were less lucky, a sleeping dog. Yes, that's right. Bed warmers came in all shapes and species. In some households, particularly among peasants or the urban poor, dogs weren't just pets, they were furry foot heaters. Curled beside your toes, panting softly in the dark, they brought both warmth and comfort. This is where the phrase "a three-dog night" originates. On the coldest evenings, you'd need more than one, and don't even think about sleeping solo. That was a luxury. Families often crammed into bed together, parents, children, maybe an elderly grandparent or two, all spooned like herring in a barrel. It wasn't just affection, it was survival. But of course, this closeness brought other challenges. Lice, for example, were not seasonal, and neither were midnight farts. If you're still imagining medieval sleep as romantic candlelit scenes, go ahead and erase that now. You're more likely to be elbowed in the ribs than serenaded. Still, there's something comforting in this communal discomfort. The rhythm of breath, the slow creak of someone shifting, a soft snore from your cousin in the corner. There's a strange intimacy to all of it. You weren't alone. And for a medieval sleeper, that was more valuable than warmth. Funny aside, some people even use bread to keep warm. Well, technically, bread bricks. Stale loaves wrapped in cloth, heated by the hearth, then tucked beneath the bedding. Economical, dual purpose, and delicious. If you didn't mind crumbs between your toes. Now, scholars still debate whether warmth strategies differed significantly between regions. Were Northern Europeans truly colder in bed than their southern cousins? Did mountain folk wrap themselves like mummies while coastal townsfolk snored in breezy hammocks? The evidence is patchy. Some argue it was more about class than climate. But one thing is certain. Sleeping through a medieval winter night required strategy, layers, and a high tolerance for smells. Wool was your friend, but it was itchy. Feathers were luxurious, but they didn't keep out the rats. And if you were sick, tough luck. Some folk recommended heated stones wrapped in moss. Others suggested onion poultices. One manuscript even recommends stuffing hot turnips into your bedding. That's right, turnip sleep therapy. And hey, if you've made it this far into the dark, drafty cocoon of medieval nights, tap 3 in the comments below if this story makes you smile, or 4 if it leaves you chilled. You tug the covers higher now, tucking them beneath your chin as your eyes flutter shut again. The air is still bitter, but the warmth you've gathered, brick, blanket, dog, and human, wraps around you like armour. And somehow, even in this awkward tangle of limbs and straw, you start to feel cosy. You're almost asleep again when something shifts in the room, a creak of the floorboards maybe, or the strange sensation of being watched. But it's not your imagination. Someone is stirring. You blink in the dark and catch the faint silhouette of Sister Agnes, barefoot and silent as smoke, moving across the cold stone floor. Because tonight, you're not just in a peasant cottage. You're in a medieval convent. And Sister Agnes? She's going to lie down beside a corpse. Yes, you heard that right. Among the more unsettling sleep habits of medieval monastics was the practice of memento mori. Remember you must die. Some monks and nuns slept in graveyards, others beside bones, skulls, or even the freshly dead. Not because they were morbid, but because they believed it brought them closer to God. For some religious orders, it was a form of training, a rehearsal for the stillness and surrender of death. If you could sleep beside a rotting body without fear, you were truly free of earthly attachments. In more extreme examples, some slept in open coffins. They called it humility. You might call it nightmare fuel. Sister Agnes slips into the narrow space beside the still form of an elderly nun who passed 2 days prior. Her hands are folded, her eyes are closed. The air smells of incense and myrrh, and just beneath that something fainter, sourer. No one speaks. The room is sacred, silent. You lie on your own straw mat a few feet away, pretending not to notice. Why would anyone choose this? Well, for one, death was always close in the Middle Ages. The line between sleep and death felt blurrier, and the Church taught that constant remembrance of mortality kept your soul clean. It made sense to treat death not as a thing to fear, but as a roommate. There's also the curious detail that some nuns believed sleeping beside bones could bring visions. One 13th century mystic described seeing angels lifting the soul of the dead sister skyward. Another claimed she received divine messages in dreams after bedding down beside a martyr's relic. Whether these were true experiences or fevered hallucinations, they were taken very seriously. And here's the quirky twist. Some religious communities didn't sleep horizontally at all. They used upright sleeping stalls. Think vertical wooden boxes like confessional booths, with just enough space to lean. You weren't supposed to get comfortable. Comfort, after all, was a worldly temptation. Experts still debate how common these sleeping with the dead rituals actually were. Some say they were rare, restricted to mystic fringe groups. Others argue they were widespread enough to be normalized in certain regions. The Church didn't always officially endorse them, but it didn't exactly ban them either. You roll over now, disturbed but oddly fascinated. There's something poetic, even eerie, about the idea that sleep was seen as a rehearsal for death. In your world, sleep is a break. In theirs, it was a test, a trial, a discipline, and occasionally a holy performance. You glance once more towards Sister Agnes. Her breathing is slow, steady. If she's afraid, she doesn't show it. She drifts off, her head tilted slightly toward the silent figure beside her. You, on the other hand, will need a little more convincing. So you pull your cloak tighter, whisper a quiet prayer just in case, and squeeze your eyes shut. No bones in your bed tonight, just shadows. You don't remember falling asleep, but now you're wide awake again, and not because of a dream. No, it's the feeling of watching, or maybe being watched. You sit up slightly, heart thumping, only to find yourself face to face with a flickering flame. Not a ghost, just a candle, one that's been burning since you first closed your eyes. In medieval bedrooms, or hovels really. Leaving a candle burning overnight wasn't just for convenience, it was protection. The flame was a barrier, a comfort, a divine watcher in the dark. You blink against the warm light and realise something odd. It hasn't burned down much. That's because it's not ordinary wax. Some households, particularly cautious or superstitious ones, used blessed candles, sprinkled with holy water and whispered over by the local priest. These weren't meant to illuminate the room. They were meant to keep the unseen out. Night, after all, was the witching hour. It was when the devil wandered, when dreams turned real, when the soul, freshly loosened by sleep, might get snagged by something lurking just outside the window. So you kept the flame going. Sometimes you even paced. There's a strange but real record of people pacing during these midnight hours, not out of insomnia, but as ritual. You can almost hear your boots on the wooden planks now, slow and measured back and forth. Some did it to pray, others to work out the stiffness of shared sleep, and still others to stay alert because they believed demons favoured the sleeping. Imagine that. You're walking circles in the dark so no evil spirit mistakes you for available property. Of course, not everyone feared the dark. Some embraced it. Night watchmen wandered with lanterns crying out the hour. In bigger towns, there were those who claimed to speak with the dead, or worse, to invite them into dreams. You're not sure if that's true, but you wouldn't open your door right now either. Want something even stranger? Some folks believed that candles could detect evil. If the flame sputtered, danced, or bent too low, it meant something was there, watching, waiting. They'd mumble a quick charm and twist the candle wick to the left, just enough to confuse any invisible guest. Scholars remain divided on how literal these beliefs were. Did people truly think a flickering candle could guard the soul? Or was it more of a psychological comfort in a world with no light switches, no street lamps, no escape from the black? Either way, the belief was real. So you sit staring into the flame, watching it flicker in the still air, and feeling the thump of your own heart start to slow. Not from peace, but from ritual, from repetition, from doing what your great-grandmother once did in a cabin like this, her fingers wrapped around rosary beads, her eyes never leaving the candle, and, in a tiny burst of unexpected humour, you remember the warning about snuffing it out too soon. It lets the spirits know you're done praying, that you've gone to sleep, so you wait a moment longer, just in case. Then, with a soft breath, you blow the candle out. Total darkness. But this time, you're not afraid. You're curled into the warmth of your cloak now, breathing slowly, almost asleep again, when guilt taps on your shoulder like a stern friar with cold hands. Have you been sleeping too much? In the medieval world, sleep wasn't just a bodily need, it was a moral dilemma. Too little, and you were weak. Too much, and you were sinful. And as always, the church had thoughts. So many thoughts. You sit up blinking groggily. Somewhere not too far away a rooster crows at the wrong hour again. One of those birds with terrible time management. But this isn't about time, it's about discipline. A good Christian, you were told, did not indulge in sloth. And yes, sloth didn't just mean laziness in your chores, it meant sleep. Excess sleep. Soft pillows. Warm beds. Any of it could damn your soul. There were manuals, actual manuals, written for monks and lay people alike, offering sleep guidelines. Some saints bragged about sleeping no more than 2 hours a night. Others claimed they stayed awake for days, praying until their bodies gave out. You, on the other hand, just want 5 more minutes. In convents and monasteries, sleep was a structured, segmented affair. You'd rise at designated hours for prayer, chant psalms until your throat cracked, and maybe, get another hour before dawn. This wasn't insomnia. This was spiritual training. For the average person, though, things were murkier. The church preached moderation, but what counted as moderate? Was 6 hours too much? Was napping allowed if you'd worked a full day in the fields? Could a blacksmith sleep longer than a tailor? No one was sure. So most people hedged their bets, rising early, breaking sleep into chunks, and never lingering too long in bed. Here's a fringe tidbit. Some villagers wore sleep amulets, small charms tucked under pillows to ensure sleep remained pure and not indulgent. These often contained bits of scripture, dried herbs, or in one recorded case, a beetle wrapped in linen. Why? No one knows. But that guy swore it helped him wake on time. Experts still debate how much sleep medieval people actually got. With no electric light, their days were governed by sun and season. In winter, they probably slept more. In harvest months, much less. Some historians argue that people were chronically sleep-deprived. Others suggest they had more flexible rhythms than we do today. But what's clear is this. The guilt was real. You couldn't just sleep in on a Sunday. That was God's day. And if a priest caught you yawning during Mass, he might just remind you with a tap of his staff that the devil visits the lazy. You lie back now, trying not to feel guilty about the comfort you found. Your eyes drift shut again, and you whisper a half-hearted promise to wake early and do something righteous. Maybe fetch water for the neighbour. Maybe just not snore too loudly tonight. Sleep, after all, is a gift. But like all gifts in the medieval world, it came with strings attached. You wake with a jolt, not from a nightmare, but from a strange metallic plunk as something lands on the floorboards beside your bed. You squint in the dark. It's a small worn parchment, and on it, a symbol of the moon. Because in this little village, as in many corners of the medieval world, sleep wasn't just about tiredness. It was about timing, and that timing was dictated by the moon. You sit up, stretching stiff shoulders, and glance at the crude lunar almanac hanging by the hearth. It's been passed down in your family for 3 generations. Each month's moon phase is marked with odd little notes. Good for long sleep, bad for resting. Avoid dreams tonight. It's not superstition, you've been told. It's science. Medieval style. People used moon charts to decide when to go to bed, when to wake, and even what to expect from their dreams. A waxing moon might bring vivid visions. A waning one, restless sleep. Full moons, of course, were infamous. Not for werewolves, though maybe, but for anxiety, sleeplessness, and marital bickering. More than one chronicler blamed a village scandal on full moon agitation. You glance out the shutter. There it is, low and glowing, like a slice of butter suspended in the dark. Tonight is a half moon, which, according to your grandmother's notes, is neutral. Good for digestion, bad for secrets. You're not entirely sure what that means, but it sounds ominous enough to make you hesitate before crawling back under the blanket. This moon-based sleep logic wasn't limited to farmers or mystics. Doctors used it too. Physicians consulted lunar charts before prescribing sleep treatments or scheduling bloodlettings. The idea was that your body, like the tides, responded to the moon's pull. You were, after all, made of humours and vapours. Who's to say a gibbous moon didn't stir the bile? And here's your quirky twist. Some people took this so seriously that they would skip sleep entirely during bad moon nights. Instead, they'd stay up in vigil, praying or weaving charms, convinced that sleep would open them to spiritual attack. In some areas, village watchmen were trained to call out the moon phase as part of their nightly rounds. Third quarter rising, guard your dreams. Scholars remain divided on how much faith people placed in lunar influence. Was it purely symbolic, a convenient scapegoat for restless nights? Or did people genuinely feel the moon's pull in their bones like a phantom pressure behind the eyes? You peer again at the parchment on the floor. It's been annotated. Someone's marked tonight with a faint X. Not your handwriting. You slide it beneath your pillow, just in case. As you settle again, you realise something strange. This old rhythm, this moon-bound sleeping pattern, is oddly comforting. It gives structure to your rest, mystery to your dreams, and meaning to your insomnia. Modern life may scoff at the idea, but deep down you suspect we still glance out the window and sigh at the full moon's light, wondering why we can't fall asleep. The moon may not decide your fate, but tonight it'll still watch you sleep. You're finally deep in sleep now, wrapped in warmth and moonlight, when suddenly you're yanked awake, not by sound or light, but by dread. Your chest feels tight, your limbs frozen, and in the shadowy corners of the room something moves. It's nothing, you tell yourself, just your imagination. Or is it? Because if you were a noble in the 14th century, this sensation would have a name. Incubus. Or maybe succubus. Either way, you'd believe a spirit had perched on your chest, stealing your breath or your soul. Sleep, for all its necessity, was also terrifying, especially if you were wealthy enough to expect good rest. For the medieval elite, insomnia wasn't just a nuisance, it was a crisis. You were paying for a feather mattress, layers of velvet and fur, and a carved oak bedstead taller than a grown man. You deserved sleep. But your mind had other plans. Insomnia, or what they sometimes called wakeful melancholy, was often seen as a side effect of wealth, education, and sin. A noble might lie awake tormented by guilt, or plagued by what one chronicler charmingly called overripe digestion. The body and soul always tangled, and so came the cures. You might try listening to music, literally hiring a harpist to lull you to sleep, or sipping a draught of wine boiled with crushed lettuce and spices. One popular remedy involved rubbing your temples with warm goose fat. Another, more niche, suggested placing a live eel in your sock drawer. Not joking. Some nobles even built private chapels off their bedrooms so they could stumble straight to prayer when sleep evaded them. You, in your dreamlike state, shuffle down a marble corridor, candles flickering on the walls, incense still clinging to the air like holy fog, and there, on your knees, you try to pray the restlessness away. Here's the twist. Some nobles faked insomnia to avoid social obligations. "I was restless last night" could excuse you from court, a duel, or even mass. Like today's Wi-Fi issues, medieval insomnia had its perks. Scholars remain divided on how prevalent noble insomnia really was. Were upper-class diaries just more detailed? Or were nobles genuinely more tormented than the ploughman sleeping in his straw-stuffed corner? Still, the fear was real. Sleep was when your body relaxed, and your enemies, visible or spiritual, might strike. So nobles hired night guards. They kept swords by the bed, they prayed, and some, most heartbreakingly, simply lay there, eyes wide, night after night, watching shadows dance across ceilings too ornate to feel safe. And tonight, so do you. Until finally your eyelids grow heavy again. The fear fades, the noble chamber fades, and you sink, not into oblivion, but into that fragile space where breath steadies, limbs go soft, and even your worries give up. Sleep comes, for now. You drift back into slumber at last, only to find yourself tangled in the strangest dream. There's a goat wearing a bishop's hat, someone's shouting about lost shoes, and your neighbour is floating upside down while reciting psalms backward. You jolt awake, heart racing. Welcome to medieval dreamland, where sleep wasn't just rest. It was a spiritual battleground, and every dream had meaning. Sometimes terrifying, sometimes divine, sometimes suspiciously digestive. You sit up, wiping a bit of sweat from your brow. The candle's long gone, the coals in the hearth are faint red freckles in the dark, and everything's quiet. Too quiet. That dream felt real. And in medieval times, dreams weren't brushed off as random brain static. They were studied, decoded, feared. You remember what your village priest said? Dreams are the messengers of God, or the devil, depending on what you ate. And you're not quite sure if your dream came from heaven or that questionable cabbage soup from supper. Dreams were so important that there were entire books, dream manuals, written in Latin, French, even early English, offering interpretations for every kind of vision. If you dreamt of flying, you were spiritually elevated. If you dreamt of teeth falling out, you might lose a relative. If you dreamt of fish, well, that depended on the fish. The average person might not be able to read, but that didn't stop them from swapping dream interpretations like recipes. And if your dream seemed especially vivid, off to the priest you'd go, hoping for guidance or forgiveness. Here's the quirky fringe bit. In the 12th century, one bishop declared that some dreams could be legal evidence. That's right. If you dreamed that someone stole your cow, and that person really had a history of thievery, your dream might end up in court. Imagine telling the judge, "Your Honour, the goat told me during REM sleep." There was also deep fear around dream demons. The incubus and succubus weren't just the stuff of folklore. They were blamed for real ailments, weakness, infertility, even madness. If you woke up tired, breathless, or sweating, you might have been visited. And if it kept happening, time to call the local exorcist. Experts still debate how seriously people took all this. Some argue dreams were symbolic but not literal. Others insist that many truly believed dreams were spiritual encounters. Either way, they mattered, especially when dreams started spilling secrets. And, oh, they did. One noblewoman supposedly confessed in sleep to an affair, twice. Her husband had her watched. Another servant reportedly muttered where the silver was hidden while napping beside the fireplace. Dreams could damn you as easily as save you. That's why some people began practicing dream guarding. Before sleep, they'd recite protective verses, wear talismans, or place holy symbols above the bed. You glance now at the small wooden carving above your own, an angel with a chipped wing. Is it working? You're not sure, but you do know this. Tonight's dream felt different, charged, maybe important. You'll have to tell someone in the morning. For now, you lie back and whisper the old rhyme under your breath. If dreams be lies, let none come true, unless from heaven they softly flew. The room returns to stillness. You let the shadows take you again. The first sound you hear this time is the bleating of sheep. Not the gentle countryside kind, mind you. This one sounds agitated, urgent. You groggily sit up and realise why. It's your turn on watch, because tonight you're not tucked in a bed at all. You're out in the open fields, wrapped in a rough wool cloak, leaning against a rock still warm from the day's sun. You're a shepherd now, and your sleep. It's not the luxurious candlelit kind. It's done in shifts, staggered, shallow, and constantly interrupted by the soft panic of hooves. Medieval shepherds rarely got a full night's rest. Someone always had to stay awake. Predators didn't sleep, and neither did thieves. And so, while one person dozed, another kept watch. Sleep came in stolen pieces, 20 minutes here, an hour there, punctuated by rustling bushes and the occasional terrified baa. You stretch your back, bones creaking, and toss a small pebble toward the sheep to hush them. Your companion snores softly nearby, wrapped in burlap. In a few minutes, you'll trade places. Until then, you sit under the stars, blinking at constellations older than any kingdom you've known. Interestingly, this type of polyphasic sleep, broken into multiple chunks, was common not just among shepherds, but among many medieval labourers. Millers who worked overnight grain shifts, guards along city walls, even bakers with pre-dawn starts all did it. Sleep wasn't a sacred block of time, it was a puzzle. You fit it in where you could. One quirky note, some shepherds were known to sing lullabies to the sheep before nodding off. Not because the animals understood, but because the rhythm calmed the flock and the shepherd. It's hard to panic when someone's singing about moonlight and hay. Scholars remain divided on whether these sleep habits damaged health or simply reshaped it. Some argue the lack of deep REM cycles led to chronic fatigue. Others point out that people likely adjusted, their bodies adapting to a rhythm more aligned with nature than the 9 to 5. It wasn't healthy, necessarily, but it worked. And when weather was kind, as it is tonight, sleeping beneath the stars had its own quiet magic. You lie back now, your watch nearly over, letting your eyes drift toward the horizon. There's no pillow, just your arm. No blanket, just your coat. But the air is clear and the silence soft. You know you'll sleep again soon, when your shift ends, when the stars have shifted, when someone else stumbles upright with a yawn and a muttered curse. Until then, you remain a shadow among sheep. Just you, the grass, and the night sky. You're back indoors now, or at least within 4 stone walls. But sleep still refuses to come easily. Not because of noise or nightmares, but because you've chosen, deliberately, not to sleep. Tonight, you've decided to follow the example of the saints. Somewhere nearby, a candle gutters. The room is cold, the bench beneath you harder than any bed, but your eyes remain open. You're not ill. You're not afraid. You're fasting from sleep itself. This was a real practice, sleep fasting, embraced by religious ascetics across the medieval world. For some monks, nuns, and hermits, staying awake was the ultimate form of devotion. After all, anyone could resist food or drink. But resisting sleep, that took real spiritual grit. You pull your rough wool cloak tighter and focus your gaze on a small wooden crucifix mounted crookedly on the wall. You repeat a prayer you've said 100 times, but tonight it feels different. Your head nods once, twice. You jerk it back upright. The point isn't to nap. The point is to stay vigilant, awake, worthy. Many early saints wrote glowingly of nights spent in deliberate wakefulness. Some even tied themselves upright or used rocks as pillows just sharp enough to keep them from dozing. Others stood knee-deep in cold water for hours, repeating scripture until dawn. The idea wasn't just to punish the body, it was to free the soul. And it wasn't always quiet reflection. Some groups, like the Flagellants, marched at night singing hymns and physically whipping themselves to remain spiritually alert. You're not quite that committed, but still, you haven't blinked in minutes. The fringe detail, one ascetic, St. Macarius of Egypt, reportedly spent 20 sleepless nights in a swamp, so mosquito-infested that his body was unrecognizable. When asked why, he replied, "I needed something to distract my flesh." You're not quite ready for the swamp. But you do place a cold iron coin beneath your tongue, a local trick to stay awake. It's unpleasant, metallic, and completely pointless. But it feels righteous. Experts still debate whether this sleep deprivation brought true visions or just hallucinations. Some say the mystics were tapping into spiritual clarity. Others argue they were just experiencing the medieval version of a sleep-deprived meltdown. Regardless, their words were recorded, cherished, and passed down like sacred treasure. And for the deeply devout, these nights of sleeplessness weren't wasted. They were seen as battles. Each hour spent resisting slumber was an hour closer to sainthood, or at least one step further from damnation. Your own battle rages on. Your fingers twitch. Your head droops. You whisper another line of prayer just loud enough to keep yourself conscious. But at some point, just before dawn, you lose the fight. Your chin hits your chest. Your breath slows. You drift. And you dream of nothing. Because even the saints eventually had to sleep. You awake this time not from a dream or a prayer, but from an itch. Not a little one either. A full-body, relentless, crawling itch that starts at your scalp and ends somewhere around your ankles. You kick off your blanket and groan softly, fingers digging into your arm. And that's when you remember what your bed is made of. Hay. Not the clean, fragrant kind from a child's storybook, but the real deal. Musty, dusty, half-dry hay stuffed into a coarse linen tick. A mattress by medieval standards. A sneeze trap by modern ones. You roll over, wincing, as something pokes your side. Probably a leftover thistle. Welcome to the humble world of medieval bedding, where comfort was an optional bonus and skin rashes were part of the package. Most people didn't have feather beds. In fact, unless you were among the nobility, you'd be sleeping on a mattress stuffed with hay, straw, or, if you were particularly unlucky, reeds. These materials flattened quickly, shifted under your weight, and rarely stayed in one place. By week's end, your bedding resembled a compost pile, and then there were the uninvited guests. Fleas, lice, and the dreaded bedbugs. A clean bed didn't mean a pest-free bed. You scratch your wrist absent-mindedly and wonder how often medieval people washed their bedding. Spoiler, not often. The linen covering the straw might be washed every few weeks, if water was plentiful and the weather fair, but the stuffing itself, almost never. Some households refreshed their mattresses by spreading them in the sun for a few hours. Others added herbs like lavender, rosemary, or mint, hoping to mask the smell and repel insects. Occasionally, they'd toss in crushed wormwood or dried tansy, natural deterrents with the delightful side effect of making you sneeze yourself awake. Here's a quirky fringe fact. In some towns, inns were required by local law to air out their bedding in public once a month. Innkeepers would drag their mattresses to the rooftops for a good baking under the sun, and customers would inspect the stuffing like produce at a market. A lumpy mattress. Bad sign. A mattress wriggling with life. Time to find another inn. Scholars remain divided on whether people actually got used to sleeping in such conditions. Some argue they became numb to the discomfort. Others think it contributed to chronic health problems, joint pain, skin infections, and poor sleep. But either way, it was the norm. You lie back down now, shifting your weight to avoid the sharpest lump. You tug the blanket up again, ignoring the occasional tickle on your ankle that might be a hair or a flea. It's impossible to tell, but oddly, despite the discomfort, sleep still comes. It always does. Because when you've hauled buckets, churned butter, and walked miles barefoot in the same day, exhaustion wins over luxury. And tomorrow, if you're lucky, you'll find a fresh armful of straw to replace the oldest patches. Until then, you scratch, sigh, and surrender to the haystack. Sweet dreams, just don't roll too far left. That's the mouse's corner. You're snoring, loudly. You don't mean to, but the combination of hay dust, ragweed, and the 6 other people crammed into your sleeping space has turned your nose into a medieval wind instrument, and you're not the only one. Across the room, someone else lets out a thunderous wheeze, followed by a snort and a fart that echoes like a drum roll on a wooden bench. Welcome to the nighttime symphony of a shared medieval sleeping space. Unlike our modern obsession with silence, solitude, and thread counts, medieval folks approached sleep with all the grace of a crowded tavern. Sleeping alone was rare. Beds were communal, rooms were cramped, and everyone brought their quirks to the pile. You're lying beside your brother, your cousin, maybe a neighbour, possibly someone's visiting uncle. There's a baby somewhere in the mix, maybe even a dog curled up on someone's legs. and each of them contributes something special. Snoring, muttering, sighing, groaning, sleep twitching, teeth grinding, and the occasional night terror that has someone shouting, "The pigs are on fire!" before they roll over and snore again. It was loud, it was smelly, it was normal. Interestingly, public sleep wasn't just a peasant thing. Even in inns, monasteries, and some wealthier households, guests often shared beds with strangers. If you arrived late to a tavern and found one space left in the bed, well, hope you're not shy. The idea of privacy, especially at night, was laughably modern. You kept your cloak on, turned to the wall, and prayed your bedmate didn't have garlic breath or an overly friendly foot. Here's a fringe detail. Some cities had official bed inspectors who would walk the streets and knock on doors, checking for illegal sleeping in crowded housing. Why? Because overcrowding was linked to disease outbreaks, and also because people talked in their sleep. And that's the problem. Because right now, as you lie there half dozing, your uncle murmurs something about a hidden jug of honeymead under the floorboards. You weren't supposed to hear that, but now you know, and tomorrow so will everyone else. Because secrets don't stay secret when your walls are made of fabric and your sleep is shared. Scholars remain divided on how people coped with the utter lack of sleep hygiene in these settings. Some believe folks simply adapted, developing what modern researchers call sleep tolerance. Others think it contributed to short tempers, daytime drowsiness, and the rise of strong ale as a nighttime sedative. But whatever the impact, one thing is certain. Sleep wasn't precious. It was just something you did when the fire burned low, the stew was gone, and the room got quietish. You roll over again, your back pressed against a cousin who kicks in his sleep, your nose dangerously close to someone's feet, and you whisper a quiet plea to St. Dymphna for just one night of peace. It won't work. Someone sneezes, someone else farts, and still, somehow, miraculously, you drift off again. You wake before dawn to the sharp crack of wood on stone, and a cold breeze licking your face. You're not in your bed anymore. You're not in a monastery or a shepherd's pasture. Tonight, you're on the road. Travelling in medieval times wasn't just dangerous, it was exhausting. Inns were scarce, unpredictable, or wildly expensive. So when you needed sleep, you made do with whatever you could find. A church porch, a barn loft, even the lee side of a roadside shrine. Wherever you were, sleep came awkwardly in stolen pieces, always half alert. Tonight you're lucky enough to have bartered a dry corner of a stable. The hay is cleanish, there's a roof overhead, and the horse in the next stall seems uninterested in kicking you. Not bad, all things considered. But sleep on the road doesn't come easy. You're not relaxed. You're listening. Always. To every creak of the beams, every shift of hooves, every rustle that might be rat, thief, or spirit. You clutch your small bundle tighter, everything you own wrapped in a cloth nestled under your head. It's not a pillow, it's insurance. Travellers in the Middle Ages were always at risk of being robbed in their sleep, not just by bandits, but by fellow travellers. The world was full of desperate people, and desperation didn't rest at night. Here's a fun little detail. Some clever vagabonds tied bells to their ankles before they slept. That way, if someone tried to sneak up on them, the jingle would wake them. Others arranged stones in circles around themselves, not for magic, but to hear them scatter under a thief's foot. Primitive alarm systems, but occasionally effective. Some towns offered sleeping benches for travellers, wooden planks under awnings where you could lie down for a copper coin. Don't imagine comfort. Imagine splinters and drizzle and the snoring of someone who smells like pickled onions. And if you couldn't afford even that, you asked for mercy. Churches often became emergency hostels for the truly desperate. If you were lucky, a friar might offer space by the hearth. If not, you curled up in the shadows outside and prayed it wouldn't rain. Experts still debate how much rest people really got while travelling. Some accounts speak of collapsed pilgrims barely able to move from fatigue. Others mention travellers rising fresh and early for long days of walking. It's likely that sleep was fragmented, tense and fitful. Never luxurious, rarely satisfying, but just enough to keep going. Tonight you drift in and out. A dream begins, then breaks when someone coughs nearby. You adjust your cloak, shift your weight, then dream again, only to jolt awake when a chicken flutters too close. But eventually your muscles soften, your ears stop straining, and in the half-light of early morning, with your back against the stable wall and your bundle still beneath your head, you manage to rest. Not deeply, not safely, but rest nonetheless. You awaken to the smell of boiled lettuce. Yes, boiled lettuce. And while your stomach turns at the thought of warm, soggy greens, this odd little brew is exactly what you're meant to drink tonight. Because you, my friend, have trouble sleeping, and in the medieval world that means it's time for a potion. You sit cross-legged on the wooden floor, a steaming cup in hand, its contents as murky as the intentions of the village apothecary who sold it to you. The ingredients? Lettuce, poppy seeds, vinegar, and a touch of honey to mask the bitterness. Supposedly, it'll calm your nerves and lull you into a restful, dreamless slumber. Supposedly. Herbal remedies were the go-to solution for insomnia in the Middle Ages, and people had opinions. Your neighbour swears by chamomile soaked in goat's milk. The blacksmith drinks warmed beer with crushed almonds. And your aunt? She once told you to rub mashed leeks behind your ears before bed. You didn't ask follow-up questions. Tonight's remedy smells like wilted salad and wet socks, but you sip it anyway. It could be worse. You could be using opium syrup known charmingly as the milk of the poppy. A popular choice among wealthier insomniacs, it worked wonders, until you got addicted or died. The fringiest cure you've heard of. Sleeping with a hot onion under your pillow. Or better yet, placing a toad's leg in a pouch around your neck. You haven't tried that one yet. But if this lettuce soup doesn't work, you might consider it. There were also more ritualistic sleep aids. You might burn rosemary at bedtime, sprinkle rosewater across your pillow, or chant a specific psalm 9 times backward. Yes, backward. The goal was to confuse the devil into leaving your dreams alone. Physicians of the time had their own recipes, often recorded in elaborate tomes with titles like the Leech Book or Compendium of Sleepful Nights. They categorized sleep as a humoral imbalance, too much black bile, or not enough phlegm, or some such poetic nonsense. Their cures ranged from the mildly effective to the wildly dangerous. One such physician prescribed roasted pig's ear with lavender. Another insisted that sleep would not come unless you rubbed bear fat on your temples, and repeated a Latin phrase meaning, more or less, may this night be boring. Modern scholars remain divided on whether any of these cures worked. Some argue the ritual alone had placebo power. Others suggest certain herbs, like valerian or hops, did have mild sedative effects. But the exact results? Foggy at best. Much like your brain right now. Because whether it's the potion or sheer exhaustion, your limbs are growing heavy, your breath slows. The boiled lettuce is still turning in your stomach, but your eyelids are winning the battle. You place the cup down with a clink and lie back, arms crossed over your chest like a saint in a fresco. And just before the dark closes in, you swear you hear your aunt's voice whisper, "Don't forget the leeks." Tonight, you sleep through a street brawl. Not because you're unusually tired, but because you're used to it. Welcome to the joys of urban sleeping in a medieval town, where rest came wrapped in a symphony of chaos. Barking dogs, clanging pots, drunken shouting, and the occasional midnight sword fight just outside your window. Or, let's be honest, through your window. You lie on your narrow cot, back aching from the day's labour, and listen to the usual suspects. Down the alley, someone's arguing with a door. Across the courtyard, a couple throws insults and crockery. A pig squeals briefly, then silence, brief, fragile, suspicious, and then a crash. You flinch, but don't get up. This is normal. This is just night. City dwellers in the medieval world had to adapt to conditions that would send modern sleepers into full panic. Walls were thin, streets were lively, and insulation was more concept than reality. Inns were often built wall to wall, floor to ceiling, with creaky beams and windows made of animal horn or thick oiled linen. Every sound carried, and privacy? Hilarious. See? Even if you weren't in a major city like London or Paris, medieval towns were noisy places. Curfews existed, yes, but enforcement was spotty at best. Nightlife didn't mean taverns and jazz. It meant toothache cures yelled across balconies, chickens that forgot what time it was, and thieves taking advantage of darkness and inattentive guards. Speaking of guards, they weren't always helpful. Some were asleep themselves, or deep in ale. Others walked the streets shouting the hour and weather, 3 o'clock and cloudy with light mist. Helpful? Not really, but it kept them awake, and it let you know they were out there, somewhere. One quirky fact, in some cities people hired nightmen to patrol specifically for fires. These poor souls carried buckets and bells and were trained to smell smoke even in their sleep. Some were famously overzealous, dousing candles mid-prayer or barging into bedrooms because someone sneezed near a hearth. Scholars remain divided on whether people in cities suffered more from poor sleep than rural folks. Urban centres offered more protection, walls, neighbours, night watches, but also more disruption. Yet diaries from merchants and scribes often describe people waking frequently, sleeping lightly, and rising early regardless. Sleep wasn't sacred, it was functional. And if your home was in the poorer quarter, let's just say walls were optional. You might sleep beside your wares in a market stall, or in a shared tenement where space was divided by hanging cloth. You'd sleep on straw, or maybe curled against a warm oven if you were lucky enough to live near one. You roll onto your side now, back to the shouting, breathing slowly. There's a lull in the noise, a brief silence that feels like a gift. You take it. You drift. Somewhere in the distance a cat screeches, a cart rumbles over cobblestones, someone burps with the force of divine punishment, and still, you sleep. Because in the medieval city, sleep wasn't about silence. It was about surrender. You wake up standing. No, you're not dreaming. Your eyes are open, your feet are cold, and you appear to be halfway down the hallway. You don't remember getting up. You don't know why you're here. But here you are, barefoot, dazed, and holding a turnip. You, my friend, are sleepwalking. And in the medieval world, that makes you a problem. Sleepwalking was more than just a curious condition back then. It was a source of suspicion, fear, and sometimes admiration. You trudge slowly back toward your bed, trying not to step on the cat, and wonder what you might have said or done while wandering. Because sometimes sleepwalkers talked, and sometimes they told secrets. In medieval Europe, people believed sleepwalking was a sign of a soul trying to leave the body. Some called it nocturnal roaming, others spirit walking. It wasn't always viewed negatively. In certain regions, a sleepwalker was thought to be spiritually gifted, closer to the heavens, maybe even a future prophet. In others, it meant you were possessed. You've heard stories. A boy in a nearby village once walked out onto a frozen river in his sleep. Another girl climbed a tower stairwell and tried to step off the edge. They were unharmed, but everyone talked. And when strange things happened later, livestock falling ill, a storm flattening the wheat, it was remembered. Always remembered. And here's a peculiar twist. Some believed that waking a sleepwalker could kill them. Literally kill them. The soul, they feared, was out wandering, and to wake the body abruptly might trap it outside, like slamming a door with someone still standing on the porch. So people didn't intervene. Instead, they followed at a distance, whispered prayers, or placed protective charms in the walker's path, like a broom turned sideways or a circle of salt. You glance now at the threshold of your sleeping space. There's a faint ring of ash on the floor. You didn't put it there. One fringe belief claimed that sleepwalkers might be cursed with unfulfilled desires. They go where their heart aches, the old women would say. That's why a lovesick boy might stumble toward a maiden's window in the dark, or a merchant might walk toward the tavern, muttering about debt. Scholars still debate the actual frequency of sleepwalking in medieval records. Some argue it was underreported out of fear of witchcraft accusations. Others believe it was lumped in with possession or demonic influence, and thus never labelled distinctly. Either way, it was not considered normal. You climb back under the covers now, heart still thudding softly. You place the turnip carefully on the floor beside your bed. You have no idea why you brought it, and as your head sinks into the hay pillow, you wonder what else your soul might do without you, where else it might walk while your body rests, and who, if anyone, will be watching. You've only just fallen back asleep when a low mumble slips from your lips. You don't notice it, but someone else might. Because in the Middle Ages, talking in your sleep wasn't just embarrassing, it was dangerous. You turn over, still muttering nonsense, maybe dreaming of meat pies or dancing goats, blissfully unaware that your nocturnal monologue could land you in very real trouble. Because people believed that sleep speech wasn't just random, it was honest, unfiltered, a crack in your soul's armour where the truth slipped out. You murmur again. This time it's a name, not yours, not anyone in your house. Someone, listening from the corner straw mat, narrows their eyes. In some places, sleep talkers were feared, even interrogated. Families kept notes, priests offered warnings, and in a few infamous cases, entire trials hinged on what someone allegedly whispered while dreaming. One record from a 14th century village mentions a man accused of theft after his sister claimed he confessed in his sleep. The stolen item? A spoon. Did they find the spoon? Of course not. But that didn't stop the punishment. You curl deeper into your blanket now, lips still moving. Something about the chest under the floorboards and tell no one. If this were a court, you'd be doomed. Here's a strange historical tidbit. Some monasteries trained younger monks to listen for sleep talk, not to spy, supposedly, but to check for spiritual disturbances. They'd keep vigil beside their elders' beds, noting down anything unusual. You can imagine how that went. Long nights, flickering candles, and anxious scribes trying to decide if donkey soup was heretical. Families took their own precautions. If someone in the household was prone to talking in their sleep, they might be wrapped tightly in linen to discourage thrashing, or even isolated behind a curtain or in a box bed to keep secrets secret. Others burned herbs by the bedside or placed a cross under the pillow. If the talking got too specific, naming names, repeating forbidden words, some turned to the local priest for help. And here's your quirky fringe fact. It was believed that sleep talkers were more susceptible to spirit influence. Not just possession, but meddling. Spirits could plant ideas in your dreams, or even speak through you. Which meant if you said something unsettling at night, it might not be you talking at all. Scholars remain divided on whether sleep talk was really taken that seriously, or whether isolated cases were sensationalized in folklore. But there's plenty of evidence that it was noticed, noted, and occasionally weaponized, especially in small communities where secrets were currency. Tonight, thankfully, no one's listening too closely. Your mumblings fade into soft sighs. The turnip you brought earlier lies undisturbed. The fire has burned down to an orange whisper. All is still. You roll over, lips parted, breath even. No one arrests you for your secrets tonight, but just to be safe, maybe tomorrow, you'll sleep with a sock in your mouth. You stir again, not from a dream or a noise this time, but from an urgency, a pressure, a very real, very human need that absolutely cannot wait until morning. Nature calls. You sit up slowly, heart sinking. Because in the medieval world, nighttime bathroom trips weren't just inconvenient, they were perilous. You reach under the bed frame, fingers fumbling in the dark until they find it. The chamber pot. Cold, ceramic, and, for better or worse, your closest ally until sunrise. You shuffle it forward carefully, whispering a quiet apology to anyone still asleep nearby. Privacy, as always, is not included. For many in the Middle Ages, chamber pots were the only nighttime option. Bathrooms, where they existed at all, were outside the main house, down a slope, across a courtyard, maybe even near the pig pen. And in the dark, with no lantern, you'd have to be either brave or desperate. You were both. In wealthier homes, the pots might be made of brass or pewter, with embroidered fabric covers to trap the scent. In your case, it's a simple clay bowl, half chipped and perilously full. You do your business, careful not to make a sound, then slide it back beneath the bed. You'll deal with it in the morning, assuming someone doesn't trip over it first. For those who did dare venture out at night, it wasn't just the cold and darkness that made things dangerous. It was the stairs. Medieval staircases were narrow, steep, and uneven. Combine that with a stub of candle and sleep-hazy judgment, and you had the perfect recipe for a spectacular tumble. Records exist of folks falling to their deaths on midnight loo runs. A tragedy and a cautionary tale used to scare children into holding it in. Here's a fringe detail. In some monasteries, monks were forbidden from using chamber pots and had to visit a communal latrine, even in the dead of night. To avoid accidents, they often held onto the rope lines fixed along the corridors. You picture it now, a solemn procession of sleepy monks, shuffling like ghosts through stone halls, one hand clutching a candle, the other gripping a rope for dear life. Scholars remain divided on how people manage sanitation in small dwellings without latrines. Some suggest that chamber pots were emptied each morning into open gutters, those same ones you walked beside on your way to market. Others think waste might have been discreetly tossed onto compost heaps, or used for tanning leather or fertilizing fields. Practical, yes. Pleasant, absolutely not. You lie back down now, relieved but a little unsettled. The pot beneath your bed seems to hum with potential disaster. You nudge it farther with your foot, then cover your nose with a blanket, just in case. sleep resumes slowly, faintly, until, from somewhere across the room, you hear a whisper. Who knocked it over last time? You're woken by the sound of footsteps, not hurried ones, not panicked, just a steady, deliberate pacing above your head. You blink a few times, listening. Someone's moving across the wooden floorboards upstairs, back and forth, back and forth. It's still dark outside, the fire's long gone cold. Who in their right mind would be walking round at this hour? But then you remember, you're not in a private home, you're sharing space in a common lodging. What amounts to a long room filled with people of varying status, noise levels and sleep strategies. And those footsteps? That's likely the innkeeper's son checking rooms. Or maybe the baker rising before dawn. Or perhaps it's just someone too poor, too wired, or too haunted to sleep. Because how well you sleep in the medieval world depends not just on your bedtime tea or your mattress, or turnip pillow, but on your social class. You sit up slowly and look around at your sleeping neighbours, each a snapshot of a different station in life. Closest to the door, a merchant snoozes beneath a cloak lined with rabbit fur. On the far side of the room, a servant curls in the straw. No blanket, no pillow, just fatigue. And above, in the loft, you can just make out the hem of a linen nightgown and the gentle rise and fall of a better-fed sleeper's breath. Sleep was not distributed equally in the Middle Ages. If you were a noble, your sleeping chamber was likely private. The walls were thick, or at least draped with tapestries, and your bed was elevated, surrounded by heavy curtains to hold in warmth and block out noise. You probably slept in a long shirt, maybe even a cap. Your mattress was stuffed with feathers or wool. Your bedstead was ornately carved. And most importantly, you had servants. One to tend the fire, one to warm the sheets, and maybe one just to stand guard against unpleasant midnight surprises. Noble children often had their own small sleeping spaces too, supervised by wet nurses or governesses who stayed awake through the night, ensuring quiet and comfort. Sleep was structured, monitored, even groomed into them. Compare that to life as a peasant. You'd sleep in the same room as your family, your animals, and sometimes your tools. In many rural homes, the family pig shared space with the children, not as a pet, but as a body heater. Parents and children piled into one bed or onto straw mats in the corner. Privacy wasn't just rare, it was meaningless. Some slept fully clothed, not just out of necessity, but because undressing was considered an indulgence. Why bother, when you'd have to be back in the fields by first light? Here's a strange little detail. In many households, servants slept in hallways, under stairs, or at the foot of their masters' beds, not in beds of their own. It wasn't about cruelty so much as utility. They had to be ready to rise at a moment's notice, to fetch water, stoke fires, or answer the call of a bell. And if you were clergy, it varied. Monks and nuns usually had regimented hours. Some orders permitted 4 or 5 hours of sleep, interrupted for midnight prayers. Others pushed for even stricter schedules, insisting that sleep should never become too comfortable, lest it tempt the soul into laziness. In fact, some religious manuals advised that luxurious sleep was a gateway to sin. A soft bed led to dreams. Dreams led to indulgent thoughts. And those? Well, they could damn you. So priests and monks kept beds hard, linens plain, and hours short, all in the name of discipline. Scholars still debate the exact hours people slept across these classes. Nobles may have had the leisure to sleep longer, especially during winters, while labourers often survived on broken rest, catching naps when work allowed. But there's evidence to suggest that most people, regardless of class, embrace segmented sleep. First sleep, waking, second sleep. It was the structure that remained consistent. Comfort was the variable. Here's a quirky fringe tidbit for you. Noble women sometimes hosted bed councils, intimate semi-political gatherings held while lying abed. Attendants, friends and family might gather around the mattress for quiet conversation, prayer or gossip. Sleep in this case wasn't private, it was ceremonial. Part social function, part power statement. You lie back again, staring at the wooden beams overhead. Your bed is modest, not the worst, not the best. You've felt the bite of cold air at night and the ache of straw jabbing your back. But you've also known the comfort of a shared blanket, the lullaby of a crackling hearth, and the slow reassurance that comes with hearing someone else breathe nearby. Sleep for you is half luxury, half labour. A space between classes, shared by all, but experienced so differently it might as well be 100 separate worlds. You listen again. The footsteps upstairs have stopped. Someone nearby coughs, and just like that, you drift off once more, neither noble nor peasant, just a sleeper among many. You're awoken not by noise or nightmares tonight, but by a firm knock on your door, 3 times, slow and spaced. Not enough to panic you, but just enough to jolt you from your hay-stuffed cocoon. You sit up slowly, heart thudding. It's still dark out, the kind of pre-dawn blackness that feels thick, like cloth. The knock comes again, then silence. You shuffle to the door and open it just enough to peer out. A hunched figure stands in the hallway, cloaked, face hidden beneath a hood. 2 pennies, they whisper, for a space by the fire. Ah, of course, it's the sleep renter. In medieval towns and villages, not everyone had a home, or even a regular bed. Many people were what we might now call itinerant workers, vagabonds, or simply poor. But instead of sleeping in the open, they rented sleep. Not a bed, just space. You gesture them in. They shuffle past with a nod, sit near the hearth, and wrap themselves tighter in their wool cloak. The room smells faintly of wet earth and old tallow, and just like that you've made 2 coins and gained a new, if temporary, roommate. This practice was surprisingly common. In larger towns especially, households rented out portions of sleeping space by the night. Corners near the fire, stretches of floorboard, spots in the stable loft. It was known in some records as the sleep tax, though it wasn't official. It was just a quiet agreement. You have warmth, they need it. And it didn't stop at homes. Churches rented sleep space in their naves. Barns were divided by invisible lines. This half is ours, that half is the travellers'. Inns, as you might expect, offered shared rooms where multiple strangers could pay to pile in shoulder to shoulder. Privacy was, once again, a luxury, and sometimes not even that. Here's a curious detail. In some port towns, dockside workers slept in shifts, literally rotating through beds that were still warm from the previous occupant. This was known as hot bedding, and no, it wasn't romantic, it was economic. A bed never went cold, and no one ever truly got comfortable. Scholars remain divided on whether these temporary sleeping arrangements contributed to the spread of disease. On one hand, bodies packed into tight spaces sharing air, fleas and germs seems like a recipe for trouble. On the other, the sheer volume of ventilation, drafty shutters, open chimneys and dirt floors may have kept pathogens from building up the way they might in sealed rooms today. Still, there were risks. Theft, for one. You glance at the figure by your hearth now. Their eyes are closed, their hands are tucked into their sleeves, but you don't know them. You've heard stories of sleep renters who slipped away before dawn with coin purses, tools, or even family heirlooms stuffed under their cloaks. Then again, you've also heard stories of renters leaving quietly at sunrise, placing a bundle of firewood in thanks, or reciting a prayer for the dead as they passed a sleeping child. Humanity came in all forms, even by firelight. A fringe tale from an old widow in your village speaks of a sleep renter who vanished in the night, leaving behind nothing but a faint scent of rosemary and a single feather on the floor. She swore it was an angel. Everyone else swore it was nonsense. Still, she never rented that spot again. You settle back into your bedding now, watching the soft flicker of firelight against the wooden beams. The presence in the room doesn't bother you. Not really. In this world, sleep was a commodity, a trade, a gesture. You give warmth, they give coin, or silence, or stories, or trouble. And when the rooster crows and dawn begins its slow creep through the shutters, you'll wake, stretch, and find the hearth empty again. Maybe with 2 coins, maybe with 1 fewer spoon, maybe with a single feather resting where their head once lay. You wake just as the light begins to change, the moment when black becomes charcoal, then soft blue, and then the first hints of pale gold. The fire has gone cold, the hearth is empty, the sleep renter is gone, and so is the turnip you were saving for breakfast. You sigh, roll over slowly and catch a faint warmth against the stones near your head. That's when you realise something odd. It's warmer here, near the hearth, than it is on your straw mattress. You drag your blanket closer and curl up right on the stones like a cat. It's shockingly comfortable, and that's when it hits you. You're not the first to think this. In fact, in the medieval world, some people preferred to sleep by the hearth, forgoing beds entirely. It wasn't poverty or mischief, it was practical. You close your eyes, letting the stone's residual heat seep into your spine. The hearth was, after all, the heart of every home. It was where food was cooked, water was warmed, and stories were shared. So why not also let it be where sleep happened? This wasn't just for peasants. In large farmhouses or longhouses, sleeping near the fire was prime real estate. Grandparents, infants, the sick, and anyone recovering from illness were often stationed closest to the embers. The warmth helped circulation, soothed aches, and warded off the biting night air that seeped in through loose shutters and roof thatch. In fact, entire families might sleep in a radial pattern around the hearth, especially in winter, like spokes on a wheel, each facing the warmth. It created a strange sort of intimacy. If someone coughed or stirred, everyone heard it. If someone snored too loud, someone else might nudge them with a socked foot. Of course, there were hazards. Ash inhalation, for one, and fire. Sleeping too close to the hearth could mean waking up with singed hair, or not waking at all. Children were sometimes bundled into wooden cradles with tall sides, just to keep them from rolling toward the coals in their sleep. To mitigate the risk, clever households used bed benches, wooden platforms or chests placed near the hearth, where someone could sleep safely elevated from the floor, close enough for warmth, far enough from sparks. These benches often doubled as storage or seats during the day, transforming again at night into makeshift beds. You glance now at the wooden bench by your own hearth and consider it. Not a bad spot. Here's a quirky fringe custom. In some areas, especially in northern climates, people would put a hot, flat stone wrapped in damp moss at the edge of the hearth and rest their feet on it like a primitive foot warmer. It was called a sleep stone. Some even carried theirs from place to place like a pet rock with a part-time job. Scholars remain divided on whether hearth sleeping was considered respectable or a last resort. Some accounts suggest it was common among servants, shepherds, and children. Others describe noble households where elderly members requested to be moved nearer the fire in their final years, preferring its warmth to the loneliness of distant chambers. And of course, let's not forget the animals. You hear a soft shuffle behind you and turn your head. A dog, shaggy and silent, has crept into the room and curled beside you. No one invited it, but it clearly knows this space, likely the innkeeper's mutt. It stretches, yawns, and lays its head against the stones. It's warm. It's quiet. You share a breath with the dog. This might just be the best sleep you've had in weeks, because while medieval beds could be cramped, straw could itch, and fleas could ruin everything, there was something grounding, earthy, about sleeping beside the fire. Maybe it reminded people of simpler things, of survival, of life before walls and rules and feather mattresses. Maybe, just maybe, it reminded them of when all sleep was shared, beneath stars, near flames, among animals and kin. You pull the blanket tighter and let your hand rest on the dog's side. Tomorrow, you'll go back to your corner mat. But tonight, just for now, you'll claim the warmth of the hearth and dream of glowing coals, slow mornings, and silence that feels like safety. You wake to the smell of smoke. Not fire, thankfully, just the lingering scent of last night's embers and the faint sweetness of burnt herbs. You sit up slowly, rubbing your eyes. The hearth is still cold, but someone has clearly tossed dried rosemary into the ashes. The air carries a dreamlike weight, as if something sacred or unsettling passed through while you slept. You've dreamed again, vividly, and not just about goats in bishop hats or floating turnips. This time, you saw someone you haven't thought of in years. They spoke your name. They warned you. About what? You can't quite remember. Just the feeling remains, tingling, uneasy. You're not alone in wondering what it means. In the medieval world, dreams weren't just nighttime brain static. They were omens, messages, sometimes even diagnoses. The space between sleep and waking was seen as a spiritual veil, thin, porous, full of voices. You glance toward the corner of the room, where an old woman sits cross-legged on a woven mat, staring into the ashes. She's a dream reader. Not officially, of course. The church frowns on that sort of thing. But everyone in town knows she understands symbols. Birds, storms, teeth, shadows. She knows what they mean, or claims to. You think about telling her your dream. In medieval Europe, interpreting dreams was a serious business. Very serious. Entire manuscripts were dedicated to it, filled with lists. If you dream of water, beware false friends. If you dream of flying, prepare for a rise in fortune. Unless you fall at the end, in which case, well, bad news. These manuals were part folklore, part theology, part medical theory. One bishop in the 12th century wrote over 200 pages on the moral anatomy of dreams. People of all classes believed in their power. Farmers would delay planting if a dream warned of frost. Nobles would postpone weddings, merchants would cancel trades. Even kings occasionally cited visions as justification for battle or retreat. One famously blamed a dream for avoiding a banquet, only for the feast hall to collapse the next day. Word spread. His dream became legend. But not all dreams were welcome. There was always the risk of a nightmare, and in medieval thinking, nightmares were more than bad dreams. They were considered visitations, attacks even. The word nightmare comes from the Old English mare, a malevolent spirit believed to sit on the sleeper's chest, crushing their breath and bringing terror. People who suffered recurring nightmares were sometimes called night-pressed or ridden. To ward off these terrors, people developed rituals. You might sleep with iron scissors under your pillow, or recite Psalm 4 3 times before bed, or draw a protective circle in chalk around your sleeping space. Some tied red string around their big toe. One especially dedicated woman you've heard of slept with a dried mole in a pouch around her neck. It didn't help, but she felt safer. Tonight's dream wasn't terrifying, but it wasn't peaceful either. It carried weight, meaning. Here's a fringe bit you might enjoy. In some monasteries, dream confession was part of morning prayers. Monks were encouraged to share their dreams in case divine messages were hidden within them. But if the dreams turned impure or dark, those monks were sent to purification chambers, usually the garden, to weed until their thoughts returned to holiness. Scholars remain divided on whether dreams were genuinely believed to foretell events, or simply reflect anxieties and physical discomforts. Some argue that interpretations were retrofitted after events. I dreamed of fire because the barn burned. Others insist that dream logic was deeply embedded in the medieval worldview. It wasn't if dreams meant something, it was what they meant. You sigh and rise from the hearth, blanket still wrapped around your shoulders. You approach the old woman and sit beside her. You describe the dream. She nods slowly, silently, eyes fixed on the ashes. After a pause, she speaks. "That's not a warning," she says, voice like gravel. "That's a calling." You ask what that means. She doesn't answer. Instead, she hands you a small pouch of dried lavender and sage, and tells you to sleep with it tied to your wrist. "It'll keep the wrong dreams out," she says, "and let the right ones in." You nod. Take the pouch. Return to your sleeping space, uncertain. And as the day fades once more into night, you lie back with the pouch cradled in your palm, wondering what else your dreams might reveal, and who else might be watching them. The night is quiet. No coughing, no snoring, no turnip thefts or monks pacing in sandals. Just a heavy stillness that feels unusual, almost theatrical, as if the world has paused for effect. You lie flat on your back now, arms at your sides, the blanket pulled up to your chin. You've arranged yourself intentionally, carefully, because tonight you're sleeping like the dead, literally. In the medieval imagination, sleep and death weren't just metaphorically connected, they were designed to mirror each other. Eternal rest was more than poetic. People believed that preparing for death involved preparing for the right kind of sleep, and so many slept in the same pose they hoped to die in. You close your eyes, fingers gently laced over your stomach, your feet aligned. It's not the most comfortable position, but that's the point. In this moment, sleep isn't about rest, it's about readiness. For centuries, artists and stone carvers depicted the dead as serene sleepers. Effigies in cathedrals showed knights with hands folded in prayer, monks resting with open palms, noble women in quiet repose, eyelids carved as if mid-dream. These were not chaotic portrayals of death. They were peaceful, controlled, familiar. Because medieval people practiced death in their sleep, posed it, imagined it, anticipated it. When someone passed away, their body was often arranged immediately into this same sleeping posture. Eyes closed, hands together, feet pointed forward. It made death less alien, less terrifying, more like an extension of something you already did every night. Even beds reflected this idea. In wealthier homes, deathbeds and sleep beds were sometimes one and the same. The frame was carved with angels, saints, or Latin inscriptions. Curtains enclosed the sleeper like a womb or a coffin. Some people even commissioned special mourning sheets during their lifetimes, to be placed on their beds during sleep and reused at their funeral. And here's the quirky twist. Some folks rehearsed their deaths before they ever fell ill. They'd lie in bed, fully dressed, hands crossed, and have a priest come in to deliver last rites. Not because they were dying, but because they wanted to practice, just in case. Of course, not everyone took it so seriously. Peasants often died where they worked, in fields, on roads, at the hearth. But even then, their bodies were washed, positioned, and laid out as if sleeping. The entire community participated in transforming death into something familiar. You glance now at the wooden ceiling beams overhead. The shadows ripple slightly as the fire flickers low. It feels reverent, like you're part of something ancient and invisible, like sleep tonight carries a different weight. You shift slightly, adjusting your spine against the uneven straw, and wonder how often people thought about this, how much time they spent preparing for a moment that would only come once. Were they afraid, or did it give them peace? Scholars still debate the psychological role of sleeping like the dead in medieval life. Some argue it was a coping mechanism in an age of plagues, war, and famine. Others see it as a ritual that gave structure to mortality, allowing people to feel some agency over how they would pass. Either way, the connection stuck. Even now we say rest in peace. Even now we dress the dead as if they're napping. Even now some of us tuck in with a whisper of that old fear or hope that this night's rest might be the last. And yet, it's calming too, to know that your body already knows what to do, that your final pose is one you've rehearsed 1,000 times, that the quiet you enter each night is not a stranger, but a friend. You inhale once, slowly. Exhale. Let your hands fall still on your chest, and for now, sleep. Only sleep. Tonight the village is unusually still. No dogs barking, no pots clattering, no night watchman stomping through the mud. It's the kind of silence that makes your ears ring, where every breath feels too loud and every creak beneath your back sounds like a warning. You lie awake longer than usual, staring at the rafters above, thinking about all the things you haven't done, the grain you forgot to grind, the roof patch you keep putting off, the debt owed to the alewife down the road. It's a mental parade of regrets, worries, and to-do lists that won't stop marching. In the medieval world, insomnia wasn't a medical diagnosis, it was a spiritual test, and the longer you lay awake, the more you wondered what you'd done wrong. You shift uncomfortably, pushing away the itchy blanket, and think, is this just restlessness? Or penance? Some believed sleeplessness was divine punishment, a sign of impurity or guilt. Others saw it as a curse, a lingering effect of envy, gluttony, or even curses cast by jealous neighbours. There wasn't much room for coincidence. If you couldn't sleep, something was wrong. You remember a story told by your grandmother. A man who refused to tithe for 3 years suddenly found himself unable to sleep. He heard whispers at his window, saw a pale woman near the river, and eventually fell asleep. Standing up, in church. He woke with his boots filled with water and his lips blue. Everyone agreed it was a warning. In cases like these, the church offered help, of a kind. A priest might offer a blessed candle, made with beeswax from the monastery and infused with lavender. Some parishes kept sleep relics, small bone fragments from saints known for peaceful deaths. Touching one before bed was thought to bring restful, even holy sleep. If it didn't, the problem was you. Here's a fringe remedy you once tried. Sleep fasting. You forced yourself to stay awake for an entire night and day, believing that eventually your body would collapse into proper rest. It worked, but only after you hallucinated that the stew pot was whispering your name. There were more mundane solutions, of course. A warm drink of elderflower and milk, a walk outside to cool the body, reciting every psalm you know alphabetically. Some even tried listening to long sermons. One town's priest reportedly published a 300-line homily specifically for those whose minds wander too wildly at night. You remember trying it once. It only made you think about taxes. Scholars remain divided on whether insomnia was as common in medieval times as it is today. Some argue it was less frequent, thanks to the absence of artificial light, caffeine, and constant stimulation. Others suggest that the psychological toll of survival, disease, war, uncertainty, made true peace hard to come by. You roll over again, trying not to wake the dog still curled at your feet. Your joints ache. The air is damp, the fire has gone cold, and every sound your body makes seems louder in the silence. A creaking knee, a grinding tooth, the slow shuffle of doubt in the brain. And just when you think sleep has left you for good, you feel it. Not like a wave, more like a fog crawling slowly over your thoughts, making them heavy. Your regrets lose their shape, your worries soften into shadows, your breath slows. You murmur a prayer, not to God this time, but to your own body. Let me sleep, just for a while, and the fog answers. You wake up slowly, the fog of sleep lifting like mist off a pond, and for a moment you don't know where, or even when, you are. The light coming through the window isn't sunlight, it's moonlight. Silvery, soft, casting pale blue shadows across the floor. You must have fallen asleep mid-prayer because the Psalter is still open beside you, one corner creased where your hand slipped off the page. You sit up, careful not to disturb the dog nestled at your feet, and stretch. There's a faint ache behind your eyes, the kind of ache that lingers from a particularly strange dream. One of those dreams that feels like memory, or maybe prophecy. You can't decide. What you can remember is the last image you saw before waking, a stranger standing at the edge of your bed, holding a candle that flickered but never melted. Their mouth didn't move, but you somehow heard the words, "The hour is not fixed." You exhale, rubbing your face. Maybe it was just indigestion. Maybe it was something more. Because in the medieval world, dreams that took place under the third sleep, the short doze after a longer waking, were considered the most mysterious. Not quite divine, not quite ordinary, liminal, between. Much like the lunar hour you find yourself in now. This period, sometime between midnight and dawn, was said to belong to those who see what others miss. Sleepers claimed to receive visions, messages, warnings. Occasionally, entire miracles were reported. A blind woman seeing her child in a dream before regaining vision. A dying monk learning the date of his death with uncanny precision. Not everyone sought these experiences. For many, this time was unnerving. A moment when shadows didn't behave, when the world was quiet enough to hear the blood in your ears. Some believed it was the time when the veil between worlds thinned, when the dead might return briefly, or the living might stray too far in sleep and not come back. You remember what the old woman said, the one who gave you the pouch of herbs back in section 24. That's not a warning, that's a calling. What did she mean? You glance toward the pouch now. It's still tied to your wrist, still faintly fragrant, still, somehow, warm. You don't know why that unnerves you, but it does. Here's a fringe custom. In some villages, dream vigils were held during holy nights. People would gather in candlelit chapels, sit silently and doze intentionally, not for rest, but in hopes of receiving shared visions. If 3 or more dreamed the same symbol, it was considered a divine message, if one person's dream was disturbing. They were watched for signs of spiritual corruption. You think about the image again, the candle that didn't burn, the words that weren't spoken aloud. The hour is not fixed. A phrase like that could mean anything, or everything. Scholars remain divided on how much influence dreams truly held over people's lives. Some claim that dream narratives were exaggerated after the fact, shaped to fit outcomes. Others believe dreams actively change behaviour, causing people to confess, to convert, to alter the course of their entire existence. You lie back slowly, unsure whether you want to dream again, or if you even dare. But just before your eyes close, you hear something. A whisper. Not in your head. In the room. You sit up, but no one's there. Just the moonlight. Just the dog. Just the faint smell of rosemary and ash. And somewhere in the rafters, you're sure you see movement. No one ever said sleep was safe. The next time you wake, it's not fear or footsteps that rouse you. It's heat. A strange dry warmth brushing your face, clinging to your skin like an extra layer. You blink and realise it's almost morning. A faint orange hue pushes through the shutter cracks, the kind of light that comes just before the sun itself, and yet the room feels different. You sit up. The hearth is dark, untouched. The blanket is half kicked away, but the heat isn't from within. It's summer. And in the medieval world, summer sleep brought an entirely different set of rituals, discomforts and superstitions. In colder seasons, sleep was huddled, heavy, centred around warmth. But when the air turned thick with pollen and sweat and the scent of damp hay, everything shifted. People slept lighter, later, and stranger. You wipe your forehead and swing your legs off the straw mat. It's damp beneath you, not from rain, but from humidity. In summer, walls didn't insulate, they trapped. Stone walls absorbed heat all day and released it at night, turning even shaded homes into slow ovens. You glance at the door and consider stepping outside, if only to breathe. You remember what your neighbour does. He sleeps outside in the barn loft during the hottest weeks, claims the hay breathes better. His wife insists it's because she snores. Either way, he swears by it. Sleeping outside wasn't uncommon in summer. Roofs, porches, wagons, cloisters, and even graveyards became makeshift bedrooms. Families dragged bedding into courtyards or gardens. In towns, people climbed onto flat rooftops and curled beneath the stars. No tents, just sky, and the faint hope of a breeze. It wasn't just for comfort. Many believed that sleeping indoors during midsummer trapped bad air, especially during the cheeks dog days, late July and August. When heat and illness peaked. Let the breeze carry the fever, they'd say, or only fools sleep in still air. But there were risks too. Bats, thieves, dew. You once tried sleeping on the stable roof and woke up soaked, confused and bitten by 3 different insects you still can't name. And yet, the memory is peaceful. Open sky, crickets, the soft hoot of an owl, something ancient and wild about it. Here's a quirky fringe practice. In some Mediterranean villages, people douse their sheets in rosewater or vinegar before bed, hoping to cool the body. Others hung wet linens over doorways, turning bedrooms into makeshift evaporative coolers. One record even suggests sleeping between 2 marble slabs, though that might have been more aspirational than realistic. Scholars remain divided on how summer affected medieval sleep quality. Some suggest shorter nights led to fatigue and increased prayer errors in monasteries. Others argue that people simply adapted, embracing segmented rest and napping more during the day, what we might now call siestas. And then there were the midsummer dreams, believed to be especially potent, especially symbolic. Some claim the solstice's energy blurred the line between dream and prophecy. You recall the candle dream from before. Was it tied to the heat, to the season, to something older? You lie back again, blanket pushed to the side, arms spread wide like sails. The heat settles on your chest like a cat. Breathing becomes deliberate, slow. You focus on your toes, your fingertips, your jaw. And somewhere outside, a nightingale begins to sing. You smile faintly, for now, the heat is just heat. The light is just light, and the dream that comes next, let it come on its own. You're almost asleep again when you hear it, a soft rustling like fabric dragging across stones. You open your eyes, nothing moves, but the sound lingers, a scrape, a whisper, a barely there breath. You freeze, because tonight, you're not the only one sleeping in the house. In the medieval world, death and sleep shared a room far more often than we'd care to admit. And sometimes they slept beside you. Not in a ghostly way, though that too, but in a literal practical sense. Deathbeds and living beds overlapped more than you'd think. Someone died. They were cleaned, posed, and laid back in the very bed they'd spent their nights in, often with the rest of the family still sleeping nearby. It wasn't morbid. It was normal. You sit up slowly, your fingers brushing the cold wall beside your mat. You've never shared a room with the dead, but you've heard stories. A great-aunt who passed during the night so quietly that no one noticed until morning. A travelling merchant who died mid-snore in an inn-bed he shared with 2 strangers. A child who passed in her mother's arms, and the mother didn't let go until the sun rose. The medieval relationship with death was intimate, constant, domestic, and it shaped sleep in quiet, eerie ways. People believed that dying in your sleep was a blessing, a sign of divine mercy. It was the ideal way to go. No struggle, no spectacle, just slipping away into eternal rest. That's why many recited prayers before bed asking for a clean and sudden end, preferably while dreaming of angels. But this belief also carried dread, because if sleep could take you softly, so could death. And sometimes you didn't come back. To ward this off, many slept with talismans, crosses, bones of saints, verses stitched into pillowcases. Others made verbal contracts with God. Let me wake, let me serve, then you may take me. It wasn't always enough. In wealthier homes, Someone would keep vigil over the dying, watching their breath until it stopped, then calling the priest for last rites. In smaller homes, there was no such ceremony. A body might remain where it lay for hours, sometimes longer, until someone fetched the parish clerk or a neighbour with a cart. Here's a fringe practice you may not believe. Some people kept shrouds beneath their beds, already stitched, already folded, not because they were sick, but because they believed it kept death away. If you're ready, he passes you by, they'd say. Others slept with coins under their tongue, ferry fare for the journey should they not wake. Scholars remain divided on how medieval people emotionally processed sleeping beside the dead. Some argue that the frequency of death normalised it, dulled grief into routine. Others insist that people never got used to it, that sleep became heavier, more anxious, more sacred. You lie back again, heart finally slowing. The rustle has stopped. Maybe it was a rat, maybe just the blanket shifting, or maybe your own breath echoing off the wall. You reach for the small cross carved into your bedpost, not because you're afraid, but because tonight you want to wake up. Just one more time. The first light of dawn slips through the shutters like a whisper, golden, hesitant, brushing across your cheek before pooling on the floor. You blink awake, groggy, unsure if you've slept for minutes or hours. The air is still, the house quiet. Even the dog is silent now, curled up at the foot of the hearth like a statue carved from sleep. You've made it. Another medieval night survived. Another journey through shadows, creaking beams, half-finished dreams and interrupted rest. You stretch slowly, joints clicking like old door hinges, and sit up, aware that something has shifted. Not just in the room, but in you. Because over these many nights, through hay-filled mattresses, second sleeps, sleepwalkers, death poses, night demons, hearth beds, and prophetic dreams, you've discovered something surprising. Medieval sleep wasn't primitive. It was purposeful, ritualistic, communal, sometimes strange, always human. You look around the room now. The bowl of boiled lettuce has gone cold beside the bed. The turnip thief never returned. The herbs tied to your wrist smell faintly of ash. The floor is scattered with footprints, yours and others, each one a breadcrumb trail through centuries of forgotten routines. You think back to everything you've done in this room over 30 imagined nights. You've prayed by candlelight, shared a bed with strangers, stolen warmth from a dog, dreamed of ghostly visitors, heard whispered confessions in the dark, slept upright, slept on straw, slept on stone. You've been alone, you've been watched, you've been a little afraid, and still, you slept. Because sleep in all its discomfort and drama was still the body's only real refuge in a brutal, unpredictable world. Here's a detail you hadn't noticed before. The walls are etched, tiny scratches where someone centuries ago likely kept count of nights past, or maybe years, or maybe the number of times they made it through the dark without a nightmare. 30 lines, like yours. There's a legend in your village that when someone finishes their 30th true sleep, a night where dreams come not from hunger, not from wine, not from fear, but from stillness, they're given a choice: rise or keep dreaming. It's nonsense, of course, but a nice thought. You rise anyway. Your feet touch the cold floor, the wood creaks beneath you. You pull the blanket tighter around your shoulders and walk slowly to the window. Slide the shutter open, let the sun in. Outside, the village stirs. A rooster crows. Smoke curls from chimneys. Children chase a chicken down the lane. The world resumes. And you? You'll do it all again tonight. Because no matter the century, sleep is never just sleep. It's a ritual, a retreat, a resurrection. And in the stillness of morning, before anyone speaks, before the bread is baked and the chores begin, you give thanks. Not just for rest, but for the strange, winding path that sleep took you through. From candlelight to corpse beds, from moon charts to chamber pots, from whispered prayers to sleepwalk confessions, you remember it all now. Every flickering dream, every moment of warmth, every echo in the dark. The world turns again, and so will you. Now, with the last candle burned low and the shutters cracked just wide enough to let in a sliver of morning, it's time to let everything settle. You've wandered through the medieval night like a quiet traveller, past creaking floorboards and box beds, shared blankets and sleepwalkers, between prayers and dreams and ghost stories whispered near the hearth. And somehow, through it all, you found your way back here. Safe, tired, whole. The medieval world didn't fear the dark. It lived in it. It shaped its sleep around it, tangled its beliefs into it, wove prayers and anxieties into every corner of every restless night. And now, as you breathe slower and softer, you carry those stories with you. Not just as curiosities, but as little fragments of humanity passed down in the dark. So let your body soften, let your shoulders drop, let the tension melt from your fingers, from your brow, from the backs of your knees. You don't need to remember every section, every sleepwalking monk or snoring noble, or dreams of pale strangers with candles. It's enough to feel what they felt, that ancient, unshakable need to close your eyes and surrender the noise. Right now, no one needs you. The chores can wait. The world will still be there when you wake. Now it's just you, a blanket, the memory of a slow-burning fire, and the gentle rhythm of your own breath. So let the story fade. Let the house grow still. Let the sleep take you, not in fear, but in warmth. The night is long, but you've made it. And now, finally, it's okay to let go. End of script. Sweet dreams.